gubbins here, generally.
Nice gubbins as well.
Yeah.
Henry's a very old friend. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Marion China is a research associate. Sorry? A research associate in the Department of History, Archaeology and Religion in Cardiff University. She is a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries and is an authority on burial customs in the Iron Age, Roman and early medieval period, particularly in Wales. And in fact, she's just come hot foot from very exciting excavations at Monmouthshire Castle, which are in process at the moment. She's at the moment working in the Leverhulme Fund, Leverhulme Trust Fund project, The Making of the March. I must confess that I know more about the Anglo-Norman March and its castles, but they were the end of a long, quite complicated evolutionary process, which Marion will be describing.
I'm not sure I'll go that far.
Sorry?
I'm not sure I can go that far yet, Jeremy.
No, sorry. Sorry, I of the evolutionary progress, not the castles. And she just comes, as I say, hot foot from Monmouthshire, where I gather there were exciting new discoveries. This Making of the March project has produced some very exciting results, partly on the, not only in the Chepstow Tintern area, which we'll be hearing about, but also on the a site called New Pieces in Montgomeryshire, which I'm sure we are going to hear a lot more about in the future. Marion?
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you. And I'd like to say thank you to the association for inviting us really to speak, because it was sort of the project, somebody from the project to come and talk to you about the work that we've been doing throughout the study area broadly, but focusing on the Monmouthshire area particularly. So I'm talking about critical locality in the early medieval frontier and a case study in the Lower Wye Valley. And you can see the names of the project team on the bottom of that slide there, but I must emphasise that this is very much a work in progress. Although it's a 3-year project that we're working on, and it comes to an end in January, but at the moment it's still a work in progress. We have still got a lot to do. So I'll give you a quick overview of what I'll be talking about tonight. So Making the March project aims and approaches, then talking about something called critical landscape and critical locality. I will be talking about the Chepstow study area, but we'll be looking a little bit at one of the more northern study areas as well before I get to that. And then looking at the Tintern area and Churchfields, which is near St Arvan's, Penterry, finishing up with that one. So, aims and approaches of Making the March. The aims of the project broadly are to look at the creation, development and articulation of the frontier during the early medieval period in the area that later became known as the Welsh March, as Jeremy explained just now. We're looking to try to understand how authority and hegemonies were contested and perhaps how resistance was organised within that frontier space. We're hoping to be able to situate the march more broadly in its European context, and also to create, I think this is quite important, a theoretical and methodological platform for new research on medieval frontier landscapes more broadly. So the approach is interdisciplinary, as we'll hear in a minute, multiscalar, cross-border and exploratory. But it's not all straightforward. That really, you can tell from that it's not going to be straightforward, because there are research problems. how do we go about studying the origin and development and articulation of a frontier that's over 200 kilometres long. Asa described it as the dike being constructed from sea to sea. So it's obviously it starts down here near the Beachley Peninsula and finishes up near Mould. So it's a massive linear frontier zone, a massive linear earthwork that is Offa's Dyke. How do we look at the origins and evolution of that? Where do you even start? You know? So, and we've also got finite research resources. So we've got to focus them on case study areas, but how do we select those in a way that will actually try to answer the question and start to answer the questions? So the solution, this is not my solution, this was Andy and Keith and Charlie have come up with this, is to focus on something, a concept that they've theorised called critical landscape and critical locality. And through that, create a framework that lets us identify and interrogate all the complexity of past power relations that affected and have characterised the contested landscapes. And this sits alongside a programme of historical and place name research led by Charlie Inslee and Richard Purkis at Manchester. So it's interdisciplinary and interdepartmental collaboration between Manchester and Cardiff. And there's also a funded PhD as part of that. Johan McCarthy at Cardiff is investigating assembly sites and practices within the study areas, early medieval assembly sites. So the first approach was to define critical landscapes. What is a critical landscape? And then to locate and examine critical localities within them and look at both in tandem. And Keith Ray, who wrote the book about Offa's Dyke with Ian Bapty, defined 5 study areas that he felt were important for us to look at: the Lower Wye Valley near Chepstow, the Middle Wye west of Hereford, the Clun Valley near Newcastle on Clun, the Middle Severn up near Welshpool, and the Allen Valley near Mould. So those are our critical landscapes, and a critical landscape is defined as a place that played a crucial role in structuring who exercised power and authority and the means through the means by which this was achieved. So they might be locations with affordances for surveillance, strategically located to afford surveillance, to control movement, and perhaps with a military and administrative infrastructure. And they can be nested as part of wider landscapes that have a multitude of critical localities that sort of are interlinked with control of agrarian and economic resources. So critical localities within these landscapes would be places that are pinch points for movement, that provide good scope for surveillance, that are defensible, that could provide or support critical infrastructure like roads and routeways, natural fording or bridging places, and navigable rivers. And locations where pushback could occur, perhaps enabling you to, if you want to go around a point of access and control, and get around the Mercians or vice versa, and circumvent the access. And places where princely or kingly residence was either permanent or transient, but that were politically crucial places where resources such as military and supply could be concentrated. So the methodology for our approach has been phased. This is a great deal of what I've been working on. Was to begin with a desk-based assessment of each of the study areas and creation of a GIS that sort of had lots of layers in it. So we had the HER data, we had portable antiquity scheme data, we had LIDAR, we had historic ordnance survey maps to sort of build up a baseline assessment of particularly the late Roman and the early medieval state of knowledge, current state of knowledge, what we already knew, the information that we had for those areas. And that enabled us to sort of target some sites that we thought, or some places that we thought might bear fruit for investigation. So Keith and I then went out and did walkover surveys of the areas, and we followed that up with geophysical survey, magnetometry of target sites. That was Andy and I. And then I've been leading small archaeological evaluations where those magnetometry surveys proved positive, and it looked as if there might be features that would pay investigation. I've been with students and volunteers running archaeological evaluations. We had two actually. Down here we had one at Tuts Hill and then one in Castleford Meadows, just below Tuts Hill, in, what was it, November and January. Yeah, it was very cold last year and the beginning of this year. And obviously then what we're hoping to do is get some dating evidence, and we're sending a number of samples off for scientific dating, about £10,000 for radiocarbon dates. So a lot of samples are going off to be dated. And then there will be contextual analysis using a landscape approach to see how these localities articulate within the frontier landscape. So just looking at how Keith went about defining the critical landscapes, we'll just have a quick look at the upper Severn between the long mountain down in the south here and Llanymynech Hill. You can see you've got east-west rivers, the Verumwy and the Severn. The Severn, at this point, we know at this point in time, the Severn was navigable as far as Buttington near Welshpool. So, you know, coming up from the estuary, obviously, you could come by boat all the way up here, bringing resources with you or taking resources the other way. This is, we think, was an older swamp, but this was the route way through. And then there are also what we think are very old trackways, east-west trackways, running this way, or Roman roads, and a major church at Llandrinio. There's also an early church at Llandacilio, which isn't on this map. We've also identified that there was an important assembly site at Four Crosses. Four Crosses is a multi-period important site, what we would think of as a persistent place that's been important for a very long time, from prehistory through to the early medieval period. And there are carbon-dated early medieval evidence for settlement at Ardleen. There's evidence for a battle at Buttington, or there's a historical document, historical reference to a battle at Buttington in the early medieval period. And there's an interesting earthwork at Ross, which we're not sure whether that's, we can't find a landowner, so we'd like to investigate it. But there's also new pieces, as Jeremy mentioned, which was an elite settlement, perhaps not permanently settled, perhaps seasonally occupied, but a very high status 5th, 7th century settlement, a bit like Dinas Powys. So you've got all this, and then you get Offers Dyke coming through. You can see the route of the dike coming up here from the south. There's a break there where we think the Severn formed the boundary, formed the barrier, and then it goes right through and it cuts off the east-west routeways, and it also cuts off the good agricultural land of the Shropshire Plain, and further to the south, the resources in the Forest of Dean, the iron and things, the salt around Chester, the Droitwich salt works and things. It's all kept within Mercia and cut off from anybody to the west by the dike. So this is a critical landscape, and these are critical localities within it. So moving on to look at the Wye Valley. We have a similar thing. We have a confluence of west-east and north-south movement. You've got the Roman road from Gloucester to Caerwent. You've got routes to Monmouth and the Forest of Dean. You've got the navigable Wye and the Bristol Channel. We know there were ferries and river traffic on the Wye and the Severn, obviously. The iron in the Forest of Dean. And this gets bisected by the dike, which was demonstrated by the work by Dick Finch, Simon Madison and Keith Ray, which is contra what Fox and Hill and Worthington thought about the dike. They didn't see it as bisecting this area, but Dick and Simon and Keith have shown that it did. And we know that there were competing Welsh and Mercian and Wessex interests in this area. We also know that it was of earlier strategic importance and later strategic importance. You've got Roman fort probably at Chepstow, and you've got a later medieval castle. But it wasn't of great interest to Cyril Fox. However, it was a landscape where there was a lot at stake. On the western side of the Wye, you have the landed core of the kingdoms of Gwent and Gloissing and the dynasty of Meirig ap Tudrig. And you've also got Welsh estates on the east of the Wye at Langcout and Tydenham, and these were being granted by, in the Book of Llandaff. There were charters granting these estates in the early 8th century and again in the late 9th century. But it's under Mercian control in the late 8th century, and then by 956, it's that Tydenham at least is back under the control of Wessex, because Edwy of Wessex is making grants in that area. So there's a lot going on. It seems to be going back and forth between Brittonic hands and Mercian or Wessex hands, and it's heavy in early medieval activity. There are important churches with stone and sculpture, St Arvan's, and Tintern, obviously. There are significant clusters of early medieval finds, and there is a possible mint at Langcout. So this is just a distribution map showing early medieval metalwork from around the Porthcasseg area and also from St Arvan's. And these are more recent finds, portable antiquities scheme finds from the area. Again, important coins, early medieval coins, and I think that's a strap end. So it's contested. It's changing hands. It's going back and forth between Brittonic hands and Mercian hands, and there's evidence for a lot of activity dating from that area. So looking at the critical localities in that area, starting down at Tutshill, Sedbury and Tydenham, where you've got the river crossings from Beechley to Aust, you've got the important church and possible fort at Tydenham, you've got the intersection of the dyke and the Roman road below Tutshill, which is where we were looking earlier in the year. And you've got the toot, the possible toot at Tutshill. Now this was one of the sites where we went and did magnetometry survey, and it looked positive. It looked as if we had features that looked like there might be a toot to look out there. We put some evaluation trenches in, and we found a little bit of prehistory, didn't we? And we found a great deal of post-medieval pot, but we didn't find any evidence of an early medieval toot. And I wonder, actually, if we should have been around the other side of the bungalow, because I did notice when we were walking from the site back down, the best view, if you're looking down towards Chepstow and the estuary, is actually around the other side of that bungalow. So I'd quite like to go back, but I don't know whether that will happen. So we had a look there, and we had a look down at Castle Meadows and found evidence for Roman industrial activity. A lot of nails and a lot of Roman pot, and evidence for metalworking down there. So we think potentially that's where they were making the nails and the tools and things to build the bridge that Simon has got the dates for. So the dike below Sedbury then, this obviously is the line of the dike at Sedbury. It's a statement to traffic on the Bristol Channel rather than accommodating shipmen. That is Andy's theory. But Sedbury itself, the place name, South Burr, has been identified by Rosamond Faith as the King's Ton of a 10th century charter. And we've seen on the LiDAR, there's a large earthwork at Sedbury. Now if I just go back and forward, between those you can see it on the LiDAR quite clearly, this shape here. That's it coloured in. Is it a late post-medieval park pale? Is it the Mercian Burr? We think it's probably a Mercian Burr, because this is the plan of a typical shape of a Mercian Burr, and it's exactly the same shape. We have approached two of the landowners who own the fields there that's in, and both of them have said no. You're not going in there and looking at it. We'd like to put a trench in that. It looks as if it's got a ditch. You can see a ditch on the aerial photographs on Google Earth, and it would be fantastic to put a slot into that and see whether it is what we think it is. But at the moment we've failed to get permission. I think we've got one more person we might be able to approach, but so we've drawn a blank, which was quite frustrating. There is also a large barrow, circled in green there. Well, a large mound of some sort. Is it a barrow? Is it a bergmot, where people could stand and speak to people within the burgh? Don't know. I don't think we're going to find out either. But, so moving further north up to Penterry and Tintern and Tyddon Chase, the river crossing at Tintern and overland routes north to Monmouth via Trelech and into the Forest of Dean, south to the east-west Roman Road, important sort of localities within this landscape. We know that, as we've said, there are estates on both sides of the Wye, so that river crossing is quite important for access to and fro between those estates. We know there's high-status metalwork from Penterry and St Arvan's and Porthcasseg, the distribution of early medieval finds, brooches and things. And Tintern, if you read the Llandaff Charters, Tintern is likely to perpetuate an earlier foundation. So it's been important for a long time. There is an early gating point through the dyke known as the Monk's Gate, which is near to complex arrangements of the dyke and the mound at Passage Grove, which I'll move on to in a second. And there are undated forts and enclosures, which are mostly scheduled monuments, so we're not going to be investigating them. It takes a long time to put together an application for scheduled monument consent, and we've done one for each area. And this is the area where the dyke on the eastern side of the Wye is at its most monumental, facing the heartland of Gwent in the west. That's a photo from Howard Williams, just showing the scale, the monumentality of Offa's Dyke in this area. It's truly, I'm sure a lot of you have been there and seen it. It's truly spectacular. It's a colossal undertaking, a colossal achievement. So what's going on here? The Tintern Ford and Ferry is the next most viable place to cross the river north of Chepstow, and is probably safer before there was a bridge. It's attested from at least the early 12th century in the Book of Llandaff Charters. Historic tracks connect the crossing at Tintern with the Roman road to the south and routes to the north, and prehistoric and Roman finds from the area suggest long-term significance. So we wonder, and I'm desperately trying not to give anything away of Simon's here, but I think that the slide probably does it already, but this could have been the main crossing between the point where the early Roman bridge below Tuts Hill collapsed, because we don't think it would have survived for very long, and the construction of the Norman Bridge down at Chepstow. So we think Tintern was probably the main crossing, the ferry at Tintern, and you can actually wade across the river there at certain times of year. There is also an addendum, a narration to the Charter 141 that recounts King Teodrig's victory in about 600 over the Saxons at the ford at Tintern. There's no historical basis for it, but the location we think is of such importance, would have been quite strategically important, that there being a battle there makes sense. And there are 3 sites of interest that surround the crossing there. There's the Passage Grove complex. I'm going to talk about all these in a moment. The Passage Grove complex is the arrangement of the sort of gates through the dyke at Passage Grove on the opposite side of the Wye. There is Drecht Dindern, which is number 2 here, and Churchfield at Penterry. So looking at Passage Grove first, this is the early gating point. This is on the LiDAR. This is a more modern, a later break in the dyke for agricultural reasons. That's quite a late break. This is the Monk's Gate, and you can see just about that the earthwork, if you're on the ground there, the earthworks have been constructed in such a way that rather than just meeting like that, the ends, one goes that way and one goes that way, so they actually sort of create a funnel and control the movement through the dyke there. And you can see the tracks that come up the the crossing at Tintern is down here on the river. This is the river. And you can see tracks coming up from the river, and they come straight here. And when you're there, it's really clear how movement up that track is directed to that break in the dike. And we think that's an original and part of the design of the dike at that point. But there's also, on the promontory at Passage Grove, is framed, so that's the two gates. The promontory here is framed by the dike itself, and it seems to have been levelled and possibly bounded at some point as well. And there's that little pimple there, which is a possible mound or cairn on the promontory. We have got permission to investigate this. We wonder if it's a barrow. We wonder why, just going back, why the dike doesn't go around it, but cuts it off. It's left it visible. The dike is so monumental in this place, but it's left that barrow visible. And so we're wondering, what's the importance of that? Who's in that barrow, if it's a barrow, and why was it left facing Gwent? Is it somebody who was very important to the Mercians, or maybe somebody who was very important to the Welsh, the Brittonic people? Why was that left? Why doesn't the dike cut that off? Because we think it's either contemporary with or predates the dike. So, and we have got permission from, we had to get permission from Forestry England because it's in a triple SI, but we have got that now, and later this year we're going to, it's going to be quite challenging with tree roots and things, but we are going to try and obtain some dating evidence from, a small evaluation of that feature. So that's the Passage Grove complex. Drech-Dindern, number 2 on the map. A boundary clause, again in a Llandaff Charter, mentions a place called Drech-Dindern, and it's been suggested that this means a place with a view of Tintern, effectively, and analysis by one of my colleagues has suggested this is likely to be the hill to the north of Tintern village, which affords good views of the crossing and down the river. So we wonder, could this be a lookout post? So that's the second site in that area. But the third site is Churchfield at Penterry, number 3 on the map. This is a site we noticed really early on when we were doing the desk-based assessment part of the project, looking at the LiDAR. I think I've got, yeah, I'll just go back and forward so you can just see the little enclosure that you can see there with later field boundaries that go across it. They're running over the top of it, so they're later. What's this little enclosure? Why is it called Churchfield? So we started sort of looking at that. We did a geophysical survey, magnetometry survey, and it's difficult to see on the screen, but there are sort of anomalies there. It showed up things that we wanted to go and investigate, the little hotspots and things. We were also aware that there were some significant early medieval finds from this field in the 1980s and 90s. This was before the Portable Antiquities Scheme, but they were reported to the National Museum. An Anglo-Saxon gilt copper alloy mount dating from the 8th century, a pin from an Irish-style penannular brooch of 7th or 8th century. And these were found within 50 metres of that enclosure or earthwork. And there are also significant quantities of late Iron Age and Romano-British finds, including military metalwork. And Mark Redknapp, when he was assessing the metalwork that Dr. Davies found, suggested the proximity of a high-status secular site in the area because of the quality of the pieces. So following on from the magnetometry, we undertook an evaluation excavation, one trench across a hotspot on the geophysics in March 2025, and we found this, which doesn't look much from there, but if I just move on to the next picture, you can see it more clearly. So it's a 4-metre wide bank, revetted on the front and back with a rubble fill. we also had, I'll just move on to the next slide, so, well, no, I'll just read it to you from here. So a 4-metre wide bank, revetted on the front and the back with a rubble core. The LiDAR and the geophys suggest that it forms part of an enclosure enclosing roughly about a quarter of a hectare, 0.25 hectares. We had Roman pottery on the ground surface below the bank and within the bottom of the bank. So the bank itself, this feature, must be either late Roman or later in date. We had quite a few little hobnails from underneath it as well. But it's unlike late Roman rural farmsteads in this area, places like, what's it called? Late Roman farmsteads in this area, Witton. Yes, Witton, and some of the others in this area. It's unlike those. It's in an exposed location. There's no water and there's no evidence for contemporary paddocks. As I said, all those other field boundaries are later because they go over the top of it. It's within the bounds of the early medieval estate of Penterry, and the metal detector finds suggest Roman, perhaps military, and Iron Age antecedents to it. So we think this is an early medieval enclosure. I just said all that. So, that's late Roman amphora-type strap end from the site. That's another one of Dr. Davis's finds, and that's from a late Roman military uniform. So this was an important site. People were up here, yeah, and it was, I think, strategically important. The reason we think it's probably early medieval, apart from the fact that the late Roman stuff is underneath it, is that Asser, describing the burh at Contesbury and some of the way it's built, he describes it as a Welsh wall built in our fashion. Asser was a Welsh monk. He says that the wall was built in our fashion, a dry stone revetted rampart. The one at Churchfields has impressive visual command over the eastern side of the Wye Valley. That's the view from the site. This is us digging it. The Tintern is down there, in the valley down there. The dike runs along, that's on the opposite side of the Wye, those trees. The dike runs along there, and the mound at Passage Grove is about here. So it's looking directly at the dike on the opposite side of the Wye. The Wye itself is not visible, but my colleague, Dr. Lady Gonzalez Bajaca, who's wizard with GIS, has done something called viewshed analysis. So, no, it's there. This is Passage Grove. These are the routeways, and the green is all the visible land from that point. If you were standing on the ground there, all this green is what you'd be able to see, and you can see the line of the dike for about 6 kilometres along there, and you can also see the routeways to east, west, and north and south, heading to and from the crossing at Tintern. So it's really, optimally sited. We wonder, could it be a Welsh redoubt? Keeping an eye on the Mercians, keeping an eye on movement in that landscape, who's coming down to the river. But there's no post-8th century evidence from the site at all, and we wonder if this is significant in terms of thinking about what we mentioned earlier about the land, the estates passing back and forward from Welsh hands to Anglo-Saxon hands and back again. Because King Howell, a Welsh king, re-grants Tydenham in 878, but Gwent was a client kingdom of English kings by the 10th century, and there was an Anglo-Saxon presence in Gwent Iscoed in the 11th century. So we think that the contestation in this area was quite short-lived. There's a period where it's passing back and forward, but it's quite short-lived. There's no post-8th century evidence from Churchfields. So it was a contestation and a struggle in that area that didn't last for very long. Perhaps it became part of Archenfield by that point, I don't know, but the tussle doesn't seem to have lasted long in that area. So, as I've said, it's still a work in progress. We would like to go back, we would like to investigate the burr, simple potential burr at Sedbury. We are going to investigate that mound at Passage Grove. But what we have found so far, our preliminary conclusions are that the Lower Wye was a high-stakes landscape where political interests intersected and evolved. The frontier space was complex and dynamic. The dyke was an imposition on that landscape, not a negotiated boundary. But we're starting to see evidence for things articulating across the frontier. Mercian and British and Welsh agencies, but we wonder if perhaps all that was done by the 9th and 10th centuries. It was a short-lived contestation, and as I say, we've got some targets for research and fieldwork in the near future, and that's me. Thank you very much. I will take some questions, but I have to say that if the historical evidence is very much, all the charters and everything, that's very much Andy's bag, and Charlie and Richard with the place names and things. So I brought my notebook. If anyone's got questions about all that, I'll write them down, and I'll pass them the answers to Jan, who can perhaps circulate them. I can talk about the archaeology, but
a number of things.
I thought you might, Jeremy. Yes, yeah. So yeah. Well, thank you very much. Anyway. Yeah.
Well, do people have questions? Do people have questions? Are there any questions?
Yes, there's one there.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know much about this, but I noticed English names on the one side and some Welsh names on the other. Is there any significance?
It's something we've noticed in all of the study areas, and I think it attests to the fact that people didn't necessarily move. Power changed hands, but people stayed where they were by and large, I think. I mean, some people may have thought, I'm not staying here under Mercian control, but I think that it attests to longevity of place names, and it attests to people staying where they were and getting on with it, and sort of perhaps their lives not being affected so much as maybe the elites, so that the people who wanted the control, it was them. It was they were the ones doing the contesting, but perhaps ordinary people just sort of stayed put and got on with it. So Richard Purkis has looked at this a lot. He's the postdoc researcher on the historical strand of the project, and his specialism is place names. So there will eventually be a monograph, and he will have a chapter in it where he talks about these very things, and that's one of the things, the place names being English in Wales and Welsh in England. I think. Yeah, but it's fascinating. Yeah.
Are there any more questions?
Can I just double check what you mean by Tintern Ford? Is it the shallow stretch just above the Lower Wye Works Bridge?
There was a ferry at Tintern, historical ferry, and you can ford it today. When the river is quite low, you can walk through yourself.
It's deeper where there's the kind of ferry slipway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's much shallower on the bit called Ashbury.
Okay.
Which is just to the left.
Just to the left. Yeah, I think it's on one of the maps, actually. I think Andy's mapped it. It might be on that one, but the trouble is with these now, I can't zoom in. So you can sort of see where he's put that red line going across the river. There. Are we? Yeah, there. That would be Tintern Ford, but I can't zoom in any closer than that. Yes, well, at the village of Tintern and just north of the Abbey, yeah.
Not down St Michael's. There's another ford at St Michael's end.
Right, okay. No, I'm not familiar with that one, but we'd have to, yeah. And maybe on the LiDAR as well. We'll go back through. Oh, what have I done? No, the LiDAR doesn't quite show it. No. Sorry.
And then the church field, that's Penterry St Mary's, or is that, there used to be the Classic, there was a church called St.
No, it's the Penterry one. Yeah, it's Penterry Farm, I think. Yeah. Mm.
We were there on Saturday.
Ah,
Would
right,
we?
okay. Yeah.
That would be Greece Paris land.
Yes, yeah.
Any more questions?
On there.
Well, obviously, though Wye Valley is very well wooded these days, presuming it wouldn't have been then if the dyke was intended to be seen, to be make a statement, as it were. You've shown very impressive embankment there.
Yeah.
What have you, any indication how well wooded the landscape would have been at that time?
It's something that Cyril Fox wrote quite a lot about. He thought that it wouldn't have been particularly wooded and that you would have been able to see the dyke from there. I think Keith and other people, I think that it probably was, but at certain times of year when the leaf cover's gone, it's something I'm wanting to do actually, to go there in the autumn or the winter and see, can you actually see Church Fields? I'd like somebody in Church Fields and me by the dyke, and can we see each other, basically? But I'm going to wait for the leaf cover to go and go and do that. But I think they would have known it was there. You definitely would know it was there. And of course, the dyke may have had a palisade or something on top of it. It's been speculated that there may have been more to it than just the bank and the ditch. That there may have been, a fence palisade of some sort on top, which would make it more visible again. The structure at Church Fields is, it's a dry stone wall, and it's probably part of some sort of structure, sort of enclosure with maybe towers on it, lookout places or something. So again, would have been bigger than what you see on under the ground today. And when Lady did the modelling for the view shed from Church Fields, she did it for somebody about my height, standing and looking, but she also did it for somebody 2 meters up on a structure to see how much further it was improved, the view and what you could see from that. Yeah.
Any more questions?
Jan?
Just following on really from Mr. Williams's question, is it possible then to do some cores and have a look for pollen?
I don't think we've got the money for it. I know
Right.
Tid here would love to do that, but I think that we don't have funding within the project to do that. But it certainly would be something that would be good to do there. It's just not something we've got funding for. So, yeah.
Thank you. I see there was a question here. Anne.
Questions?
Anne, yes, Anne.
How defensive do you think the bank is?
The enclosure bank.
No, the entire office dyke.
I don't think it's meant to be defensive. I think it's offensive. We are here in your face. We have taken your lands from you. We have put this through as a statement. I think it's more of a statement than and a barrier to movement. It's cutting people off.
From the east, looking west.
Sorry?
This is from the east, arcing office side, looking west, saying that we have taken your land.
Yes, yeah. They had taken. They put this. It's like a full stop. You're not coming here and taking these resources. I mean, Andy's map of the resource. The good agricultural land stops where the dyke is. There's a little bit sort of between just to the north of Llanymynech and around that sort of Severn area. There's a little bit of good agricultural land, sort of a little pocket of it near New Pieces, but most of it's in the Shropshire Plain and the Cheshire Plains, and it's completely cut off. The salt extraction, the silver on Llanymynech Hill. There were silver mines on Llanymynech Hill. That's cut off by the dyke, and the iron in the Forest of Dean. is cut off by the dike. So they knew what they were doing. When they put it there, they knew, well, we want that, and we want that, and we want that, and we want that. And we're not interested in anything further west. Yeah.
So in answer to the question about trees, if it's offensive or defensive on the other side, you wouldn't allow trees on the bank because otherwise people could sort of sneak up and...
They could, yes. We can't tell whether there were trees there or not without pollen cores, like Jan said. So, yeah, it would be good to do. I think Fox thought that the whole dike probably was treeless, but other people have thought, no, that can't be the case. So, yeah.
It does seem more like a statement of ownership.
It is. Yes, it is. And it's also been suggested that it may have also been a way of controlling or dominating or asserting power over Mercian groups in that area by making them construct it. By, a way of often saying, right, I'm in charge of you all now, I'm in control of you all, and I want a linear earthwork like some of the, like Hadrian's Wall, like some of the Carolingian earthworks. He was in touch with the Carolingian court and quite influenced, I think, by the Carolingian court, according to Keith's book. And he may have been wanting to emulate them by having his own big linear earthwork. And Charlie has suggested it may have been a way of asserting control over his own people by making them construct it. And it sort of served a dual function, that he could make a statement to the Welsh and make a statement to his own people at the same time.
Any more questions? Well, if not, I'll ask Canon Arthur Edwards if he proposed a vote of thanks.
Can you hear me? Yes, well, it's a pleasure, Dr. Marion. I know nothing about the subject, and I was fascinated by your approach, by your methods, by your careful preparation, by your looking for the answers to the questions that you set yourselves. I thought the Marcher Lords were much later. They were enough trouble, but I gather that we had a battle somewhere between Chepstow and Monmouth in the 7th century.
There's at the ford at Tintern. It's historical reference, but
I thought that Penterry was a plague village. But so you want to be careful when you work there.
Yes.
But all that's 14th century. In fact, the word medieval is the most strange, isn't it, in the dictionary? Because who decided what was medieval history and who decided what was early medieval history? But we look forward to your findings. I mean, geophysical survey is so exciting, as Dr. Mark Lewis has shown us. And keep going. If with my other hat on, if you want to submit an article to the journal, when you have some more positive conclusions, we certainly look forward to it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming here this evening. You gather from the questions that people have been interested, that they've listened, and that you presented it very well. So we look forward to your findings.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And as I said, if anyone has any more questions they think of later, they can email them to Jan. And if the archaeology is really sort of the bit that is my part of the project, is running the evaluations and stuff. Andy's the person for the historical stuff, the charters and everything, Richard for the place names, and Charlie's looking at the broader European context. So you kind of got, I don't want to say that they're the organ grinders and I'm the monkey, but but I'd be happy to pass questions on. So. Okay, yeah.
Sorry, I haven't been able to talk to you.
It's fine, Jeremy, it's fine.